Such an approach, I believe, would renew and revive the hopes and expectations of developing countries in the efficacy of the world body. Zimbabwe reposes her hopes in a United Nations that recognizes the equality of sovereign states as enshrined in the founding charter. Mr. President, I want to express my heartfelt congratulations to the Republic of South Sudan on its attainment of independence and its subsequent admission as the 193rd member of the United Nations family. As we all congratulate this new nation, Zimbabwe calls upon the international community to render all the necessary support to its government and people in tackling the numerous development challenges that lie ahead of them. Zimbabwe stands ready to make its modest contribution to that end. Mr. President, the theme, the role of mediation in the settlement of disputes, is most apt. But how do we, the United Nations members, measure in relation to it in our activities here at the United Nations and out there in the real world? It is my principled view that we must be duty and honor bound to operationalize the principles upon which the Charter of the United Nations is based. We must not be guilty of manipulating the Charter to serve our particular or sectional designs and ambitions. The Charter is our set of commandments that must be strictly obeyed by each and every member if international and regional peace is to be maintained. We cannot honestly say today that this is the position in regard to NATO states versus Libya. Whatever political disturbances might have first occurred in Benghazi, the process of mediation and peaceful negotiations was never given full play. It was deliberately and blatantly excluded from shading positive influence over the developments. There was quick resort to invoking Chapter 7 of the Charter with gross deliberate misinterpretation of the scope of the mandate originally given NATO to oversee and protect civilians. Mr. President, bilateral hatreds and quarrels or ulterior motives must not be allowed to creep into considerations of matters pertaining to threats to international peace and security, or even to the principle of the responsibility to protect. We are yet to be convinced that the involvement of the mighty powers in Libya's affairs has not hindered the advent of the process of peace, democracy and prosperity in that sister African country. Our African Union would never have presumed to impose a leadership on the fraternal people of Libya as NATO countries have illegally sought to do and in fact have done. At the very least, the African Union would have wished to join those principled members of this august body who preferred an immediate ceasefire and peaceful dialogue in Libya. The African Union was and remains fully seized with this crisis and will spare no energies in fully complementing the United Nations so that peace returns to Libya and its tormented people. We wish that process Godspeed. Mr. President, the newly minted principle of the responsibility to protect should not be twisted to provide cover for its premeditated abuse in violating the sacred international principle of the Charter, which is the principle of non-interference in the domestic affairs of states, because to do so amounts to an act of aggression and causes destabilization of sovereign state. Moreover, to selectively and arbitrarily apply that principle merely serves to undermine the general acceptability of it. Indeed, more than other states, all the 5 permanent members of the Security Council bear a huge responsibility in this regard for ensuring that their historical privilege is used more to protect the United Nations Charter than to breach it, as is happening currently in Libya through the blatant, illegal, brutal, callous NATO's murderous bombings. There we see NATO bombing places, seeking, hunting and hounding the children of Gaddafi. Have the alleged sins of the father now visited the sons, the children? Have the children lost their right to life? They are no longer human beings. They are being hunted every day. Or is it because each of them is no longer worth the price of the barrel of oil? After over 20,000 NATO bombing sorties that targeted Libyan towns, including Tripoli, there is now unbelievable and most disgraceful scramble by some NATO countries for Libyan oil, indicating thereby that the real motive for their aggression against Libya was to control and own its abundant fuel resources. What a shame. Yesterday it was Iraq, and Bush and Blair were the liars and aggressors, as they made unfounded allegations of possessions of weapons of mass destruction. This time it is the NATO countries, the liars and aggressors, as they make similarly unfounded allegations of destruction of civilian lives by Gaddafi. Mr. President, when we in Zimbabwe sought to redress the ills of colonialism and racism by fully acquiring our natural resources, mainly our land and minerals, we were and still are subjected to unparalleled vilification and pernicious economic sanctions. The false reasons lies again, alleged being violations of the rule of law, human rights and democracy, which never were the truth. My people have condemned these illegal sanctions, and recently over 2 million signatures of protesters have demonstrated their antipathy to them. We thank SADC and the African Union for supporting us and demanding the immediate removal of the illegal sanctions. Mr. President, we in Africa are also duly concerned about the activities of the International Criminal Court, which seems to exist only for alleged offenders of the developing world, the majority of them Africans. The leaders of the powerful Western states guilty of international crime like Bush and Blair are routinely given the blind eye. Such selective justice has eroded the credibility of the ICC on the African continent. Mr. President, my country continues to work with others for a revitalized General Assembly. However, our ambitions extend to the need to reform the Security Council as well. Africa's call for at least 2 permanent seats for its members on the Security Council has been constant for decades. Africa cannot remain as the only region without permanent membership of the Security Council. Mr. President, the current global economic crisis and its attendant financial crisis compounds the plight of us, the most vulnerable, that is, the developing countries. The present international economic and financial architecture has to be reformed and made to respond timelessly to the real needs of all our peoples. The situation challenges the ability of our developing world to achieve